Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Noelle, and in this video I'll be walking you through some of my thoughts while working on a few practice paintings. My goal for this painting session was to try some monochromatic studies of color photos I found online. I wanted to commit to painting something simple because it's just easier to paint some small practices rather than a larger polished piece. What you see on your screen are a few paintings in my sketchbook that I was just finishing up before filming the other pieces. The paints I'm using on this page are Perylene Violet, or the purpley one, neutral tint for the one on the left, and the piece at the bottom was Permanent Brown. I already had some 4x6 sheets of paper cut, so I chose to use them for this exercise. It can be challenging to tape down watercolor paper without wanting a border on some sides, so here's a short taping demonstration on how I get around this issue. I applied strips of tape on the back of my paper, flipped the sheet around, quickly measured where I wanted my borders to go, and then proceeded to tape down the front edges onto my board, also covering the tape that was initially attached. I also use these angle lifts to prop up my piece while I am working. This is a new strategy for me, but I like having better visibility of the surface I'm working on and how the water spreads differently at an angle. For this first study, I selected a simple reference that had mostly clear lines and bold shapes. I could easily see that there was contrast between the darker background and the bright grassy and sandy foreground. The first layer does not need to be perfect because the layers above will hide a lot of the uneven pigment distribution in the washes, but here I am experimenting lifting paint to mimic the texture of long windswept grass, and I think it looks cool. If I was using color, it would work a little differently, but in the future that would be a neat experiment. The element in this piece that took me the longest to paint was painting all the grasses in the foreground. It's a lot of brush strokes that I need to be careful painting because it's really easy to make grass look messy and dark. These grasses are in the sun, so there needs to be clear shapes and shadows to define their shapes properly. I almost want to say that half the painting time for this piece was just painting the grasses alone, and that's because everything else moved so quickly in just a few washes. Also, sometimes I think that if I put enough dots as well as carefully placed lines on a painting, it will eventually all come together and feel right. Sand, grass, and water can have a lot of details, and I like to include it. Of all the pieces in this video, this one is my favorite. At the start of this piece, I sketched out the basic shapes and used a kneaded eraser to gently lift some of the graphite off the sheet so it doesn't stand out too much in the finished piece. The reference for this piece was much more complex than the previous one. I'm trading in organic and natural subjects with stiff architecture and paved roads. My intention was to make each piece for this video a monochromatic study, but once I got my first layer of paint down for this one, I thought it would be cool to see what would happen if I glazed color on top. The cool thing about this green color that I mixed is that I only used Hansa yellow and a little bit of neutral tint. So basically it was a cool yellow mixed with a cool gray color to get this really bright green. I was hesitant to add another paint on my mixing palette because I wanted to keep it limited, so I avoided using any blues. I believed that the neutral tint was cool and blue enough to take care of that role instead. There were several spots in this piece that needed more shading despite having a first layer that roughly shaded everything. It just wasn't enough. This doesn't make this piece a good value study, but just a good old regular study. Unfortunately, I do feel indifferent about the outcome of this piece, which is kind of funny because I spent far more time working on this one than the other two. I think it would have worked better if it was larger, so I would have more room for details and if I had chosen a different selection of colors. I just don't find it very engaging or immersive. On the flip side, I don't want to say that I didn't enjoy painting this piece. I liked the experimentation and painting the tiny details like the trees, the windows, the roofs, and the power line cables. This subject has potential, and I might choose to revisit it later with a new approach. This was the last piece I created, and according to my camera footage, I was able to complete this piece in just a little less than 30 minutes. I did paint this in a rush because I honestly needed to get ready for bed, so I picked a reference photo that I thought I could paint quickly and painted it quickly. So this piece depicts Mount Hood in Oregon overlooking an orchard. When I was painting the trees, I was experimenting with different methods and techniques to see if anything stuck. This first layer looked pretty messy, and while in some ways it did look cool, I painted over it with darker brushstrokes anyway. For this exercise in general, I was hoping to get a little more thoughtful practice with painting trees and leaves than I did. My current go-to strategy to paint trees is to paint neat and smooth blobs or chaotic, messy blobs, and guess which ones these are. But I would like to find a place in the middle where a tree can have good form, but the leaves can also be distinguished. One thing that I did learn from this study is that I did not really leave any white space in the painting with the exception of a small space on the left. My photo reference was very hazy, so it wouldn't be realistic to depict the snow on the mountain as pure white. But if I still wanted it to look hazy and have more contrast, I could save some white spaces in the trees or grasses in the foreground. There are unlimited right ways to approach a subject, and I would like to acquaintance myself with more in the future. Thanks for sticking around this long. If you like what I do, consider purchasing an art print, liking this video, or subscribing to my channel. All my supplies and information are linked below. Thank you so much for watching.